Righty. Test audio check. Mic check 1 2 1 2. All good. Mic is good. All right, we're gonna get going today. We got a pretty big article to read. Uh, Feel free to check out the description and click on the links to support liberationnews.org. This is fully voluntary for my benefit and for the benefit of anybody else that wants to read along or watch. We will be starting today reading article by Stephanie Pavlik, published September 16th, 2024. Headline: Civics Class for Radicals, the Electoral College. All right, this is a pretty long one. So we're going to take our time learning about the Electoral College, it seems, on this article. Cool. So the photo description: a meeting of the Electoral College in Annapolis, Maryland. Credit Flickr. And article reads as follows. Every young person in America is taught in school about the wonder of the U.S. system of government, brilliantly designed to protect freedom, flexible enough to solve any problem, and given legitimacy by the consent of the governed. But this is a fairy tale version of U.S. politics, bears no resemblance to reality. In fact, these notions might seem so outlandish that many people's eyes glaze over at the mere mention of the intricacies of how the government functions. For those who want to put an end to this unjust order, it is absolutely essential to understand those intricacies. It is not necessary to grasp the ins and outs of the Constitution or the legislative process to come to the conclusion that the system has to end, but to actually bring about this profound transformation of society, we need to know in detail how our enemy operates. Liberation News is producing the, quote, Civics Class for Radicals, end quote, series to shine light on the reality of this system of government of, by, and for the rich. Read other articles in this series here, link provided. The idea that the United States is the world's greatest democracy is at the very core of the idea of American exceptionalism. The ruling class uses the myth of U.S. democracy to manufacture consent for imperialist invasions and electing meddling in countries from Venezuela to Iraq to many, many other in the global south in the name of, quote, spreading democracy, end quote. The capitalist elite work hard to funnel radical energy behind social movements inside the United States back into the electoral system, claiming that U.S. democracy is so perfect that voting is the only action needed to exercise that democracy. However, peeling back the curtain on how votes are actually tabulated for the top position in the United States, it's easy to see that the entire U.S. electoral system was not set up to create democracy, but actually to make sure that the ruling class is protected from it. Nowhere is the complete lack of democracy more apparent than in the system to elect the President of the United States, the Electoral College, the last line of defense against democracy. The, quote, founding fathers, end quote, were very open in their disdain for the idea of democracy. The Federalist Papers, the historic document from 1787 that set up much of the basis for the U.S. Constitution, is rife with arguments against the establishment of a democratic system for the U.S. government. The men who created the U.S. government were extremely condescending in how they described working people, calling them, quote, obnoxious, end quote, turbulent, end quote, and a whole host of other insulting terms. For example, in Federalist Number 10, James Madison writes that democracy is at odds with the values of the government he hopes to create. A pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion of interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check in documents to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence, it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the right of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. While the quote, founding fathers end quote, were more or less united in the decision that they could not allow working people a voice in their own governance, they still needed a form of choosing leaders that would give some illusion of impartiality and fairness. In Federalist number 68, Hamilton introduces his idea for the method of electing the president, the Electoral College. Hamilton viewed the Electoral College as a way to ensure that the quote, right people, end quote, were selecting the president. An example, it would place the power of choosing the president in the hands of people who were part of the ruling class and create a layer of separation between the execution and the supposed fickle whims of the average people. Hamilton wrote about how this enlightened form of electoralism would insulate the electoral process from the quote, heats and ferments, end quote, of common folk. It was also peculiarly desirable to afford as little opportunity as possible to tumult and disorder. The choice of several to form an intermediate body of electors will be much less apt to convulse the community with any extraordinary or violent movements than the choice of one who was himself to be the final object of the public wishes. And as the electors, chosen in each state, are to assemble and vote in that state in which they are chosen, this detached and divided situation will expose them much less to heats and ferments, which might be communicated from them to the people, than if they were all to be convened at one time in one place. Here's a picture. The description reads, slave quarters at Mount Vernon, George Washington's plantation. Over 500 slaves worked at Mount Vernon over the course of Washington's life. Image by Tim Evans. The article reads as follows. At the time the Federalist Papers were written, a deep debate was raging over how the president should be chosen. One idea was the Virginia plan, in which the legislature would choose the executive. Another idea was the New Jersey plan, in which each state would get one vote towards the president. Some raised the method of using a popular vote to elect the president. None of these plans, however, satisfied the most powerful members of the ruling class of the day, the plantation-owning slave drivers. The Electoral College had an edge over the other plans due to its huge popularity among the Southern slaveholding elite. The South, at the time, was pushing for the three-fifths compromise, which counted each slave as three-fifths of a person when counting the census for apportioning representatives. The Electoral College tied the number of electoral votes to the number of representatives for each state, and the Southern states saw an opportunity to maximize their influence. They were also able to avoid the question of suffrage for slaves by turning down a system for a popular vote. In resolving the question of how to choose the president, James Madison viewed the Electoral College as the obvious choice, as he stated in 1787. There was one difficulty, however, of a serious nature attending an immediate choice by the people. The right of suffrage was much more diffusive in the northern than the southern states, and the latter would have no influence in the election of the score of the Negroes. The substitution of electors obviated this difficulty and seemed on the whole to be liable to fewest objections. In keeping with general U.S. history, the Electoral College began with the racist aims of appeasing slave owners and keeping the plantation-based economy humming. The Electoral College also had the benefit of not being reliant whatsoever on the votes of the working population, who, regardless of race, generally were far less in favor of the institution of slavery compared to the people who profited from owning slaves. At its inception, state legislatures mainly chose electors. Even as more sectors of the U.S. population gained suffrage, they continued voting for presidential electors instead of directly for president. For many years, presidential electors were not a partisan position and did not pledge to vote for any specific candidates. This formulation was in line with Hamilton's conception of the Electoral College as made up of educated, free thinking men who were to make their own choices for president with the support of the populace. In fact, it was not until the 1800s that any presidential candidate's name even appeared on the general election ballots. What is the Electoral College? While the identities of individual electors are nowadays obscured from the general public, the anti-democratic process of the Electoral College has hardly changed since the institution was first established in the late 1700s. Due to the existence of the Electoral College, it's fundamentally impossible for any voter to actually vote for a president candidate directly in the general election. When voters cast when voters cast their votes every 4 years for president, they never actually vote for the president and vice presidents themselves. They are instead casting their vote for the presidential electors nominated by the party or body to which the presidential and vice presidential candidates belong. The Constitution leaves broad discretion to the states to decide how presidential electors from that state are nominated and elected. In some states, the electors are chosen at party conventions, and in others, the presidential and vice presidential candidates choose the electors for their slate directly. Many states employ a quote, winner takes all end quote, system for electing presidential electors. Kentucky and Maine notably use a district based system. Once the votes are tallied for presidential electors, the governors of each state prepares a certificate of ascertainment that includes the name of all individual electors to which candidates those electors are pledged, and the vote tallies for each presidential elector. The governors of each state send these certificates to the office of the Federal Register, a part of the National Archives, to be received by the National Archivist. In mid-December, the winning presidential electors meet in a designated location in their respective states to cast their votes. This is done by preparing a certificate of vote designating the recipient of each elector's vote and signed by that elector. They send these certificates to the President of the U.S. Senate, an example, the Vice President, the Archivist of the United States, the Secretary of State of each state, and the Chief Judge of the Federal District Court of the district in which the electors met in each state. Finally, each year on January 6, the electoral votes are finally tallied. The Vice President presides over this vote count in the presence of Congress and officially certifies the election results. The fake electors plot. The crucial final date in the Electoral College process probably sounds familiar to anyone who remembers the January 6, 2021 far-right assault on the Capitol trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election and keep Trump in the presidency. On this day, some of the most vile elements of the vigilant right, from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers, stormed the White House with collusion from high-level military, police, and security officials. The media has painted these events as a one-day anomaly from fringe extreme elements in the United States. However, the January 6th insurrection was not simply a one-off violent, angry mob, but the culmination of a plot coordinated by top officials in the Republican Party to use the very structure of the Electoral College to manipulate the 2020 presidential election results. Just a few days after the 2020 general election, Republican Party lawyer from Wisconsin came up with a plot to interfere with the vote count long enough that Biden could not be certified as president, and Trump would remain in power. They modeled this plot after the racist events of the 1876 election, in which multiple states sent conflicting electoral certifications to the Senate, delaying the final electoral count to the point of constitutional crisis. Only 13 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the 1876 election season was marked by both increasing black political representation as well as a racist backlash from white Southern Democrats who wanted to end the Revolutionary Reconstruction period. Election day came with widespread fraud and racist voter intimidation by paramilitary groups at the polls, particularly in the South, against black Republican voters. During the official vote count, presided over by the sitting Republican vice president, Democrats objected to the Republican electors' certifications of vote from three states, then filibustered effectively to prevent a resolution by the temporarily appointed Electoral Commission. For nearly 3 months, the election had no clear winner. Finally, the crisis was resolved mere days before Inauguration Day with the Compromise of 1877. Republican Rutherford B. Hayes would end Reconstruction in return for the presidency. By the 20th century, the peaceful transfer of power seemed to be a hallmark of the American system, but Trump's team looking to overturn the 2020 election results recalled historical precedent that showed this peaceful transfer was not to be taken for granted. Since 1876, no process has been created to resolve conflicting electoral votes from a state. The Republicans planned to get fake certificates of ascertainment from swing states, where it would be easier to cast doubt on official vote counts. The 2020 fake elector scheme spread quickly. Top Republican Party officials in 7 states in which election officials had certified Democratic Party wins, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, and New Mexico, agreed. The Republican Party slates of presidential electors would meet on the legally designated date for the Electoral College in mid-December and craft their own certificates of vote reflecting a Trump victory in addition to the certificates of vote that were to be submitted by the Democratic Party electors. These fake certificates were submitted to all officials who are usually required by law to receive certificates of vote, including the National Archivist and the sitting Vice President Mike Pence. And here's a picture, the 10 Republicans who met in December 2020 at the Wisconsin State Capitol to cast unauthorized Electoral College votes for President Donald Trump. Screenshots from court documents. Article reads as follows. The January 6th insurrection aimed to delay the certification of votes long enough to keep Trump in office and create a constitutional crisis. Like the racist crisis in 1876, by introducing competing vote counts, the insurrectionists directly threatened Pence while storming the Capitol, chanting, quote, "Hang Mike Pence," end quote, in an effort to intimidate him into introducing the fraudulent certificates onto the floor of Congress during the vote count. Although Pence ultimately did not honor the fraudulent certificates and certified Biden as a victor, the January 6th insurrection called into question the validity of the Electoral College process and set the stage for potential future challenges to the meager amount of democracy enjoyed by the people of the United States today. The popular vote, a tenacious relationship. Although the insurrection failed in overturning the 2020 election results, it came frighteningly close to having a major impact on the election results and also threatened the lives of many members of Congress who did not go along with the scheme. Following the questionable events surrounding the 2020 election certification, lawmakers attempted to reform the Electoral College with the Electoral Count Reform and Presidential Transition Improvement Act of 2022. This act tried to close gaps in which way the Electoral College process is carried out without making any fundamental challenges to its structure. Other reforms have had similar effects and avoided taking on the fact that the Electoral College remains undemocratic to its core. The Electoral College gives vastly different weights to a person's vote depending on which state or voter lives in. Depending on which state a voter lives in. Electoral votes are equal to the sum numbers of representatives in the House of Representatives and the number of senators from each state. Therefore, states with a smaller population get more electoral votes relative to their population, as each state gets 2 senators regardless of a state's size. As a result, the state with the lowest population, Wyoming, gets 1 electoral vote for every 195,000 people, while California gets 1 electoral vote per 712,000 people. A person who lives in Wyoming's vote is almost 3.5 times as powerful as the vote of someone from California. And there's a graph here of how votes work and the strength of each vote based on state. Population per electoral vote for each state and Washington, D.C. 2020 census. A single electoral could represent more than 700,000 people or under 200,000. Image Perocoder. The article continues as follows. Furthermore, it's growing increasingly common for presidents to be elected without achieving a majority of popular votes. Two of the last 6 presidents, George W. Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016, entered office with fewer votes than their opponents. In fact, in 2000, the final election result was decided by about 500 votes from Florida. The Florida election process that year was marked by voting machine glitches and confusing ballots that made it possible for voters to misinterpret which candidates they were casting their vote for. Bush was certified the winner on election night, but when courts ordered official recounts, Republican staffers threatened violence and even rioted to shut down the recount. In the end, the votes were settled in Bush's favor. Imagine what the United States would do if an election like that happened in any country threatened by US imperialism. While the role of a presidential elector is today usually little more than a ceremonial role in practice, nothing necessarily ties electors to the outcome of the popular vote. No federal law states presidential electors must cast their vote for the presidential and vice presidential candidates to whom they have pledged, and in fact, most states have no requirement that presidential electors vote for the candidate whose slate they are part of at all. These electors, who are nominated and elected as part of the slate but then cast their votes for different candidates in the Electoral College, are known as, quote, faithless electors, end quote. The laws regarding faithless electors vary greatly from state to state, with some states invalidating the votes or fining the electors, and some that don't penalize a faithless elector in any way at all. So here's another picture of faithless elective laws. Vary immensely from state to state. Image by Ketret. So New Mexico has vote counted with penalty. Uh, a lot of gray states have no laws, like Rhode Island, uh, Louisiana, and then vote voided with penalty. I believe that is North Carolina. Uh, yep. So we're going to move on here. Reading along. A high-profile Supreme Court case arising from the 2016 election attempted to at least partially resolve the ability of states to tie their elector votes to the candidate to whom they pledged. In this case, one elector voted for Faith Spotted Eagle, and 3 electors from Washington attempted to cast their votes in the Electoral College for Colin Powell instead of Hillary Clinton in the last-ditch effort to influence Republican electors to defect from Trump. The state of Washington fined these presidential electors and invalidated their votes. The landmark 2020 Supreme Court case decided that punishing faithless electors and replacing them with new electors were within the state's constitutional rights. Many hailed this case as a victory for democracy, ignoring the fundamental anti-democratic structure of the Electoral College itself. Maintained in the two capitalist parties' status quo. The typical, quote, winner takes all, end quote, system of allocating electoral votes in each state ensures the difficulty of gaining momentum for any party or candidate outside the two capitalist ruling class parties. States' abilities to regulate elections independently of each other ensures that third parties have to wade through a massive patchwork of different laws and procedures in each state to gain ballot access. But even when they do manage to successfully get on the ballot, the Electoral College stands as a final hurdle to national representation. The ruling class, while usually spouting praise for the United States democratic system, go into overdrive every election season to make sure one of their two-party prevails as the winner. Today, the Electoral College continues to ensure that the results of the election will be decided in a handful of so-called quote, swing states, end quote. In 2024, Democrats and Republicans are waging their fight almost entirely in the states of Georgia and Pennsylvania. The Electoral College ensures that not only will the major parties not campaign at all in the states where two-thirds of the population lives, but that the overall outcome of the election will rely on only a few tens of thousands of votes from residents of a few counties in even fewer states. While the Republicans gear up for another challenge to the legitimacy of the vote count in 2024, the Democrats have resorted to direct attacks on third parties' ballot access as a strategy to win the highly sought after electoral votes from Georgia and Pennsylvania. Traditionally, line by line signature challenges have been the preferred method to keep third parties off the ballot. Interestingly, this strategy seems to be shifting. The ballot access challenges in 2024 in Georgia and Pennsylvania have relied almost solely not on signature challenges or invalidating the presidential and vice presidential candidates themselves, but on the eligibility of the electors nominated by each alternative party. If the system is so democratic, why does it even matter who serves as an elector? Real democracy means a whole new system. While the electoral system has shifted in some minor ways since it was created, the basic function of the Electoral College as the last line of defense against democracy in the United States has remained exactly the same. Endless reforms cannot fundamentally change a system designed explicitly to safeguard the ruling class from the will of the people. Calls for new ways to model the electoral system nationally continue to gain steam, including demands for a national popular vote and ranked choice voting. On the other hand, the ruling class continues to defend the Electoral College to the hilt because they know that that in a truly democratic system, their days in power would be numbered. Developing real democracy requires a whole new system. Hashtag government. All right. Um, that was a heavy article. But yeah, so there's not much else to add because these articles are so detailed and so good. My only opinion on this is uh, based on how corrupt the law is, right? Um, how electoral politics just isn't, it was designed not to be revolutionary to begin with. Uh, as historically proven, most gains for the working class have been through activism, mobilization, education, unionizing, uh, protests. Uh, when enough people hit the streets, when enough people rebel and disagree with something, with an issue, to the point that it starts affecting capitalism economically, then things shift pretty quickly, right? Uh, This is why it's important for us to learn about labor history, working class labor history, and how it really has been leftist organizations like socialists, communists, even anarchists that have led the way, have paved the way for better human rights, better working class work conditions, better regulations. And this is why we should support leftist parties or organizations. Uh, Even in the case of like, if we're speaking about, say, rejecting the duopoly, rejecting both establishment party clowns, and saying voting for a third party or an independent candidate, it's not just enough to vote for them, right? Regardless of the possibility whether they win or not, as the electoral shows, uh, your vote counts even less when you vote for a major party. So, voting for an independent or a third party is not just uh, an act uh, of defiance. It's not just a statement. It's not just to make a political point, but it's actually to energize and uplift that party or that candidate. Whether it's for most people right now, Claudia de la Cruz or even Jill Stein, the whole point of supporting them is not supporting them just because you think they can win, uh, but supporting them because you're in it for the long haul to actually educate with them, organize with them, and mobilize with them to make serious changes in the United States, to fully reject the uh, the oligarchy as it is, right? Uh, so those are my thoughts on that. I'm personally definitely on board with Claudia de la Cruz. Uh, she is part of PSL, which is organization that definitely moves for social reconstruction of the United States. I support that. We don't have to get into that right now, but the reason I support that is because social programs are better. People uh, would have a healthier lifestyle under universal health care, under uh, housing as a right, full education as a right, free education, as well as food as a right. These are things that in this time and age, where there's plenty, uh, they shouldn't be for-profit systems. That is just complete foolishness. But I don't want to get on a tangent on that because this was such a strong, detailed, long article. Um, but yeah, those are my thoughts on that. That is the longest article I have ever read on here, I think. Civics for Class for Radicals, the Electoral College. That was pretty good. Oof, an article on Adams here. Top clown, top cop clown, top clown cop. All right. I'll get back to this one in a second. Let me check the audio here. Audio is good. Audio is solid. I'm back. I'm gonna sit up straight. All right, here. Let's see. Have my tea here. It's crazy. It's already September. I started doing this in January, and yeah, it's only October, November, and December left after this. Of reading all these articles every week. Uh, I might continue to do this next year, uh, but instead of reading every article, actually, you know what? I might just do this every Sunday or every day next year to keep reading these articles because it's a great way for me to keep actually informed and it's worked out great. Uh, Pretty flexible on this too. I don't stick to a schedule anymore. I do it usually sometime on Sunday when available. I try to do it in the mornings, like before lunch, but that just didn't work out today. Here I am. Definitely take advantage of this and listen to these articles through me if you can't read them. But definitely support Liberation News if you can. These guys do great work writing these articles. Um, Me as a reader, I'm doing okay. Hope to get better. Let's move on here. And the article titled is No Cops on the MTA. NYPD is the biggest threat to public safety. Article by Party for Socialism and Liberation, New York City, September 17th, 2024. The photo is of Mayor Eric Adams and NYPD at a June 22nd, 2023 press conference at the MTA station. Let's not forget that Mayor Adams, one of the top cops, uh, is being investigated here for fraud. Him and a whole lackey team, uh, his lackeys. Uh, So, what does that say? Don't believe these guys. Stop electing these guys that sell you fake promises, and don't actually explain to you what they're trying to do. I mean, if any of these folks, first of all, aren't starting off with saying universal health care, they're not representing you. Get out of here. Get them out of here. Stop listening to them. Anyways, article reads as follows. On the afternoon of Sunday, September 15th, two NYPD officers opened fire in a train car at the Shutter Ave L train station in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. Four people were shot, including one of the firing officers and a bystander who was shot in the head, who is now in critical condition. What started this bout of extreme police violence? Officers reported they witnessed someone skip the turnstile. The NYPD shooting on Sunday exposes the waste of billions of taxpayer dollars on a hyper-militarized police force that neither protects us or keeps our communities safe. Brownsville is a black neighborhood with a poverty rate of 39%, the highest in New York City. Instead of addressing the root causes of poverty, the city's solution is to divert more funding to the police and make public services like transit even harder to access. Eric Adams, former NYPD captain, as well as Governor Kathy Hochul have flooded the MTA with police officers since 2022, most recently adding National Guard troops to major hubs. In August 2023, the city raised the base MTA fare from $275 to $290. Meanwhile, Adams' renewed campaign to crack down on crimes of survival like fare evasion has cost Wait. Adams' renewed campaign to crack down on crimes of survival like fare evasion has cost taxpayers $151 million in NYPD overtime. This latest increase in policing is especially hard on Brownsville riders, who are nearly 40 times more likely than the average to be ticketed by the NYPD for fare evasion. There is no clearer example that than what happened on Sunday to show that the NYPD do not protect and serve the people of New York, but instead defend the private property interest of the wealthy elite. These are the solutions that the capitalist system offers our communities. Instead of addressing why 290 subway fare is unaffordable for so many New Yorkers, the police flood our subway stations and bus stops to harass and criminalize poor and neglected neighborhoods. Rather than tax the hundreds of billionaires and millionaires that live in this city, the working class is expected to pay a regressive tax in the form of transit fares to maintain essential infrastructure, risking their lives if they don't do so. The people of New York deserve affordable transit that is free from relentless state surveillance and repression. We demand the immediate firing and full prosecution of the officers involved, removal of all cops from the MTA, and make it transit free in New York City. Racist police brutality must end. Okay, okay. Uh, so I guess we should focus here on the very end article, right? What PSL or Liberation News suggests. Well, yeah, what PSL suggests should be the answer. Obviously, they made it a simple conclusion, other than writing a what potentially could have been two more pages to the conclusion here. The people of New York deserve affordable transit that is free from relentless state surveillance and repression. Uh, it should just be free. Period. If the fare is zero, then you don't need to stop people for the fare, right? And it should be zero. Obviously, people take the metro because they can't drive or because it's necessary. I mean, everybody uses it. Why not just make it part of the tax maintenance fees for the city? Just encourage people to ride the metro, right? We demand the immediate firing and full prosecution of the officers involved. Yes. In addition to that, I believe these officers should be. This is where it gets thick, right? Because we need to believe strongly for everybody in the thought of restorative justice and rehabilitation, not just for people who we call criminals or do people that do petty crimes, but also for officers, also for corrupt politicians, right? We're supposed to be a better system. We understand that these officers uh, are motivated by the system that trained them to be this way. They're empowered to be uh, corrupt or aggressive by the system. So they're until the system recreates what we call policing into a better, safer, more productive form, then officers are always going to be this way. Uh, Remove all cops from the MTA. Again, if we had a policing system that was more productive, we wouldn't need to remove cops, but perhaps have cops on there to reduce violence on the metros. You know, walk around cops, maybe with billy clubs. I don't know. Definitely not with guns. Definitely not gun ho. Definitely not with the mentality to shoot people just because they didn't pay the fare. You know. Um, yep. And making transit free in New York City. All right, so that's the going back to the beginning there, making transit free in New York City. I think that's important. I think uh, this should be a socialized process where it's fully socialized uh, for the benefit of everybody. We socialize sidewalks and streets, right? Socialize the subway system. Um, Make sure it's constantly running. Make sure that it's a process that is beneficial for everybody. uh, Racist police brutality must end. So this goes back to the whole systemic issue where it's not just a bad cop, right? As a leftist, a socialist, even a stoic, or someone that thinks about philosophy or psychology or humanitarian or egalitarian, we have to believe that all people are equal, all people are fallible or flawed, uh, and we are products of our environment, right? So when we say racist police brutality must end, we're not talking about uh, all cops are inherently racist. No, we're talking about a system uh, conditions people to act racist or be racist. Uh, but a better system, a more productive system, would actually encourage officers to be more supportive, to be able to talk down or de escalate a situation instead of trying to use an authoritarian hand or just pull their gun out right away at people, right? Uh, I like to believe that generally most people want to be good officers, but they just can't be because the system isn't designed for them to be good officers. I've seen many reports of how police officers have actually left their roles because there was so much corruption involved that they did not want to be actual officers. You can just look that up on YouTube. Plenty of articles, plenty of interviews, plenty of reviews. It's not make believe, it's serious. The system is broken, and it's broken because everything always leads back to capitalism, which is the main motivation for the most ghoulish things that people can imagine, to exploit the exploitation of the working class by the people above, like the oligarchs, uh, to try to extract as much profit as possible. Uh, let's think about this just for a second. If you are an employer, if you own a business and you're making, let's say something reasonable, like $10 million a year in profits, and you're only paying your workers below living wage benefits so that they can barely get by renting a studio apartment, right, in a city where rent is not regulated well. Um, yes, it's your duty as a human being, as a moral human being, to actually spread the wealth while you're making 10 million a year, which you don't need it. You can live off of just like $500,000 a year easily, easily. But you're only paying your workers a salary of maybe like, who knows, part time 20, 30K, full time maybe 40, at best 50K. That's horrendous, especially if they're well educated people too. If they're only making like 50K, that's terrible. Uh, that's not to say that people that aren't well educated shouldn't make a living wage. Yes, they should make a living wage as well. Um, but this is how it all trickles down from the top. And what trickles down isn't the wealth, but it's the exploitation, it's the immorality of the system that corrupts everybody from the top down. Uh, cool, and it makes what most people call a dog eat dog world. All right, let's move along here. Missouri inmate, basically. All right, no cops. Case for Susan Bowen. Show that. All right. Audio check 1 2 1 2. Audio is good. What do we have here? All right. All is good. Um, this is another short one here. Uh, all right. So this article is titled "Missouri Inmate Faces Execution for Crime He Did Not Commit." Article by St. Louis Liberation Staff, September 19th, 2024. All right. So this is going to be a sad article. Extremely sad. On August 11th, 1998, Felicia Gale was found stabbed to death in her home in St. Louis. Forensic investigators found fingerprints, hair, footprints, and DNA on a murder weapon. Marcellus, quote, Khalifa, end quote, Williams was arrested and sentenced to death for her murder, but the evidence left at the crime scene does not match him. Despite the fact this evidence does not match, and that the prosecuting attorney and the victim's family all agree that Williams is innocent, the execution is still set for September 24th. The prosecution's case against Williams was based on unreliable testimony by two people who had been promised reward money and leniency in their own criminal cases. They gave contradictory statements and revealed no information that was not already known by police or media. Just before an innocence hearing on August 21st, a new DNA report revealed that the DNA evidence on the murder weapon was contaminated because the St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney's Office handled the knife without gloves before the original 2001 trial. With Williams' hope of freedom gone, his lawyers reached a compromise with the prosecutor's office in which William would take a no contest plea to first-degree murder and receive life in prison without parole. St. Louis County Circuit Judge Bruce Hilton signed off, as did Gale's family. However, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey, a far-right, unelected official, did not. At Bailey's request, the Missouri Supreme Court stopped the agreement. The Missouri Attorney General's office has a history of pushing for the execution of those found innocent. In 2003, the Missouri Supreme Court asked then Assistant Attorney General Frank Young if he was suggesting that, quote, even if we find that someone else is actually innocent, he should be executed, end quote, to which Young responded, quote, that is correct, end quote. Dozens of local activists who have been involved in the pro-Palestine movement and the 2014 Ferguson uprising were on the scene to support Williams. In an interview with the Liberation News, Jason Jackson, co-founder of Medical Students for Justice in Palestine, said, quote, the prosecutor responsible for Khalifa's incarceration admitted in front of everybody that he excluded black jurors because of their hairstyle and likeness to the defendant. Missouri is one of 27 states where this form of racial discrimination is still legal. If no action is taken, Khalifa will join a long list of martyrs who have been killed by this system simply because of their race. End quote. On September 12th, Hilton struck down the attempt to vacate Williams' conviction, stating, quote, there is no basis for a court to find that Williams is innocent. Williams is guilty of first-degree murder and has been sentenced to the death, end quote. Following the decision, Missourians to abolish the death penalty released a statement, quote, we will not stop fighting until we dismantle this murderous system and ensure no more lives are lost to its brutality, end quote. Liberation News spoke to a St. Louis attorney who asked to remain anonymous, who said, quote, the state doesn't like to overturn these kinds of things because it calls the entire system into question, end quote. The ruling class knows that the economic and so-called justice system in the United States is illegitimate, and they would rather put an innocent black man to death than let the curtain be pulled back even further. Click here for information on Free Khalifa petition. The featured photo is activists spoke at a press conference in support of Marcellus, quote, Khalifa, end quote, Williams, who is scheduled to be executed September 12th. Liberation photo. Let's put aside how corrupt this system is, and talk about the moral issue here, the moral implication that they don't care. I mean, that's just in itself, it's morally horrible, right? That they don't care whether the man is innocent or guilty. They just want to make sure that he dies because we are not allowed to question the system or peel back the layers of onions of corruption in the system. Now, let's talk about the moral issue of just the death sentence in general. Uh, you are the government is giving out the message that murdering is bad, so we are going to execute somebody to show you that murdering is bad. We're going to kill people to show you that killing people is bad. And this is supposed to be some form of justice or punishment. Um, it's not. It doesn't align morally in any way whatsoever. It just shows people that murdering people is justice, is what it's trying to tell you, right? As long as you do it in a legal manner, I suppose. Like that's like there's supposed to be a legal manner to kill people, which no, there shouldn't be. It's murder is bad. Period. Um, this goes to the whole justification for people to uh, kill other people. It's like if you didn't uh, find any other alternative first to uh, to defending yourself other than the most violent way to defend yourself, then it's not really morally based to begin with. So I think it's very important to see that this is also a construct of the system that allows people to justify murder by saying it was a just cause, or it was justified, or it was done legally. Uh, when there's definitely a better way to do things. Now, with the judicial system, uh, like not even just aside from whether someone is guilty or not. Uh, the whole point is supposed to be to prevent uh, these kind of things from happening, if possible, uh, through education, uh, through support groups, and if these things happen, uh, I think there has to be what people call restorative justice, right? A study has shown that things like restorative justice and rehabilitation actually makes people more whole. The studies have shown that people seeing that have been victimized by people that committed murder uh, have uh, have not been as happy or have not been as productive seeing the murderer uh, be sentenced to death as they have been through an actual process of restorative justice and rehabilitation. Um, so I think we give a very bad example to humanity, to people morally, when we say things like uh, murder is justified through the legal systems. Uh, this is not to be confused with using uh, uh, using lethal self-defense as a last resort if necessary. For example, within wars or attacks where you have no other choice. Uh, literally, it's justified only during war, where some people are actually literally shooting at you, and you may have to shoot them back. Uh, you know, but that's about it. Resistance, revolutionary resistance. Uh, but yeah, this is an interesting article. Uh, so I go back more to the moral construct of it as the things that I've learned through philosophy as a leftist as well. Things that I've learned through the study of restorative justice, which is more in line with a leftist thinking of rehabilitating and actually uh, helping people. And when I talk about rehabilitating, it's not just the people that committing the crime, but the victims of crimes are rehabilitated so that they can live better lives, so that they can understand that things that happen not by their fault, but by the fault of a system that actually lacks support for everybody. Uh, okay, this is sad, man. This guy is going to the. He's gonna get the death sentence in 2 days. This guy that does not did not even probably wasn't even there that night. Probably had nothing to do with it that night. Who knows? He was probably totally disconnected from it. But because some judge doesn't want to look bad and doesn't want to make the system look bad, he's like, "Yeah, man, we gotta take this guy out." Uh, it's horrible. It's just a big reflection on how corrupt this whole system, this whole U.S. system really is, to the bone, corrupt to the marrow of the bones. How we justify uh, the CIA, we justify coups, we just justify interventions, uh, we justify the exploitation of resources from other countries. We justified colonialism, manifest destiny, the Crusades. We just justify everything that benefits us without any actual moral compass. Uh, except for the only compass that might is right, right? It's like I said earlier, it's a dog eat dog situation, and I personally have chosen uh, to fully try to deprogram as much as possible and live away from that type of mentality. The way I have done that, like I said earlier, is through studying more about philosophy, psychology, socialism, restorative justice, rehabilitation, uh, Stoicism and its four pillars, which are knowledge, courage, temperance, and justice. There's also other philosophies like Taoism, Buddhism, um, things that will make you a wholer, happier person. that have definitely helped me within the last couple of years uh, to actually find a way for myself to be happy, to be content, uh, and to just try to be more peaceful and lead a better life, not lead a horrible rat race where I'm just trying to uh, outdo my neighbor or do better than my neighbor. The race is within me, right? Am I happy with what I have, or with who I am? And if I'm not, then the issue isn't external. The issue is really internal. I should have my basic needs met and be very happy with just that and with who I am. If I'm not, then I have a lot more work to do with myself. And this is a daily struggle that we all go through because it's we're all human. We all have these issues, right? But through practicing every day, through reading, through journaling, through studying, uh, you can actually live calmer, uh, more egalitarian, more morally sane lives. And you can actually learn to see where all the issues and all the problems are, not just externally throughout the world, but internally in your own life, how things affect you as well. So I suggest people definitely find ways to find inner peace to really enjoy the externals in the world. Uh, all the money in the world is not going to make you happy. Studies show that after a certain amount of money, more money just doesn't make you any happier anymore. So there's no need for the gluttony or the greed. Uh, the battle is really within each of us. And this is just something that capitalism does not teach us. It just teaches us to want more and more because we have to fill profit margins somewhere, right? We're just consumers to the system. We're not actual human beings to them. Trust me, we're not. Okay, so let's click on this link here for free Khalifa petition. All right, it's a petition. Uh, the looks like the link was broken. Following the decision, Missourians to abolish the death penalty released a statement. Yep, they have an Instagram. Yeah, man, totally against the death penalty, especially because so many people get put through the death penalty historically that were not fully proven to be guilty. And rather than make that mistake, I'd rather people just go uh, to jail for the rest of their lives. Even that, I don't think is fair. I think rehabilitation uh, to make them better people is better, which is just not something that happens in jail. I don't think it does, according to the studies. Um, and like I said earlier, uh, the justice system killing people for punishment or for justice as an example of how we shouldn't kill people is just such a huge hypocrisy and oxymoron. We need to stop that. All right. I mean, even the judicial system is so corrupt. The way judges are elected or bought, and the way the jury is selected is so corrupt. The whole system is such a mess, man. Such a mess. But here we are, trying our best to make the best of it. All right. So there's no need to fill the hour. I think, yeah, it's been an hour already. So I'm going to step away for the day. Thank you, everybody, uh, for joining or not joining or feeling free to listen to this. Have an excellent day. Like I said, these are just my opinions based on the articles, based on what I've read, based on what I learned. Feel free to make your own opinions or comments, and we can chat about it. We can exchange ideas and learn from each other.